Today we're going to talk about Leo Tolstoy's The Death of Ivan Ilyich. I think that's how you say it. I hope that's how you say it. I know I'm saying it wrong. But this was a really interesting book because when I first started reading, I'm like, this is kind of just like drawing on. It's not really that great so far. And then by the end, you're like, okay, I see why all of this setup was done. I see what the point of this is. And there was two things that it really reminded me of, and I'll tell you the two books right now, and then I'll kind of compare them throughout, and I'll kind of say what I found in terms of similarities and differences and stuff like that. But the two books that this really reminded me of was first the book of Job, which if you haven't read, it's my favorite book of the Bible, at least that I've read so far. But and also the Metamorphosis by Franz Kafka. And if you've read all three of these, you see the obvious similarities, but The Death of Ivan Ilyich is essentially a story about a man who has lived in seemingly a good way, but his life is hollow, his life is empty. It's not all that was cracked up to be. He followed the right path. He was a good person in terms of what society expected, but it left him somewhat empty, somewhat hollow. I just said that, but I couldn't think of a better way to express it. But it's that idea that the life that life puts on you, the life that society wants you to live, is going to not lead you to the right path. It's not going to give you fulfillment. It's not going to give you what you need. And we often learn that too late. And this is perhaps one of the best examples of this idea in a story. I don't want to reveal too much, but I can't really talk about this without giving away certain things. So again, if you haven't read this book yet, maybe it's your sign to click off because I'm going to talk about the book. But as I said, it follows the story of a man who died. Obviously, you find out he dies right away in the story, and it follows his friend, and his friend goes to the funeral. And, you know, before he even goes to the funeral, there's kind of this discussion that, oh, I get to take over Ivan's job. I get to take his position. I'm going to make more money, and this is a good thing for me. And you kind of see this coldness in this world. You kind of see this emptiness in this world, and it's this weird idea that we like to push to the back of our head that, like, when we die or when we're no longer here, our job is going to care about us, that we're going to leave a legacy, that anything of what we do in this world is going to remain, aside from, you know, the impact you leave on your family or the things you do to help other people out and uplift them and uplift the world as a whole in that sense of things. But there's this weird idea that the more accomplishments we have, the more we can write our name in the history books, the more important we are. And that's just, you could tell Tolstoy's trying to tell you that this is just a false sort of idea of how things really work, and he's giving you the true essence of how things really work. But then you get to the funeral, and at the funeral, Ivan's friend is talking to Ivan's widow, and the widow basically doesn't even really care about him dying. It's more so like, oh, how can I get more money from his estate? How can I make more money from the death benefits? And in fact, you know, Ivan's friend is a lawyer. He's an attorney, and the wife knows more about the death benefits than he does. So it's like, clearly she had been thinking about this for a while. Clearly she had been discussing this for a while and learning and trying to squeeze absolutely every penny she possibly could from the death of her husband. And it kind of shows you this really shallow picture of this guy's life, and you start to see the cracks in the foundations because on his face, Ivan's life looks perfect. You know, he has a respectable job, he makes a good income, he has a good family, it seems, but the more you read, the more you see that's not the case. And then it goes into sort of Ivan's backstory, and I don't really want to dwell on the details of that because I kind of, not to say I skipped over it, but it didn't stand out to me as much as the details that I'm sharing. And, you know, you can obviously go read that for yourself if you're interested in those types of details. But we get this kind of picture of Ivan's slowly decaying physical health, and it starts with a few symptoms that, you know, don't really bother him, and then it continues to progress, and then he goes to specialist doctors and tries to do all he can, but his body is just not agreeing with any of the treatments. It's just shutting down. It's just not working. And in the end, they don't even find out what's wrong with him. He's kind of just debilitated, and he's wasting away to nothing. And slowly over time, his condition worsens, and his family is trying to console him, and they feel like, why is Ivan mad at me? What did we do to him? And it's kind of a very interesting sort of depiction of how mortality affects family, how the loss of a loved one affects family as it's happening, and how we kind of treat people that are no longer capable of doing what they once were. Very similar to the Metamorphosis. I said I was going to reference the books that I found similar. In the Metamorphosis, obviously Kafka uses the example of a traveling salesman who turns into a beetle, and eventually his family kind of they have a bittersweet sort of feeling when he dies, because they're no longer burdened by him. They no longer have to take care of him. They no longer have to, in some way, kind of, be shut off from the rest of society in order to take care of him, in order to hide him, in order to do all sorts of things to keep him alive. But that's what really reminded me about the Metamorphosis as I was reading this, and that was really the great carryover, and a lot of the same themes, a lot of the same ideas. I like to summarize the Metamorphosis as, do people really love you, or do they love what you do for them? And do we really see people the same as when they can no longer do what they once could for us? And this eternal kind of question about mortality. And obviously the death of Ivan Ilyich has something very similar, because he's no longer able to do anything physically, and it's really taking a toll on him. Things that he was once able to do, he feels ashamed for having to ask, and you get a deep psychological sort of outline of this feeling in him, and this feeling of inferiority, and what this really leads him to. And then this is what gets Ivan sort of asking the questions that really do remind me of the Book of Job. So if you're not familiar with the Book of Job, I'm going to summarize it very quickly. Essentially, it's a story where God tests a man who has done nothing wrong. And Job is this very rich man. He has all of these things. He has everything that you could ever ask for, and he is a great servant of God. And the devil, depending on the edition, I think the devil's in all of them, I'm not sure, but the devil basically says, oh, I want to test this guy, and God gives him the A-OK to do that. And basically the devil gives Job these boils, and these boils disfigure his face. He takes all of his riches away, and the entire time Job's friends come to him to ask him to rebuke God, to ask him to renounce God and curse his name, but Job doesn't do anything. He asks why, but at no point does he ever say, why did God forsake me? Why did he do all these things? I can't follow him anymore. He holds steadfast in his faith, and he thinks that there's some reason. And in the end, God rewards him with everything he lost and then some. And the whole point of the story is that God does things to good people for the sake of something that's beyond our scale of understanding, that there's balance, and it's working on such a grand scale that we can't quite understand it, and there's always something to be learned in each and every lesson. And there's a very similar theme in Ivan Ilyich. I wouldn't say it's at this cosmic scale, but in the end, as Ivan Ilyich is dying, he's faced with this reality that the life he lived really wasn't the life that he thought it was. He thought he did everything perfect. He thought he did everything well, but as he looked back at his life, he realized that in his childhood he had great memories, and in law school he had great memories. But as he got older, as he kept going, the memories got less and less great, and he kind of had no one to blame but himself. He kind of just did things for the sake of doing them. He did things for the sake of this was the right thing to do, and because of that he lost his soul in the process. Because of that he lost his heart. He lost his love for life, and if he could go back, he would change it, but he can't go back. And this is where Ivan continues to struggle. He continues to fight against the idea of death. He continues to fight against his own mortality. He's unwilling to accept it. And I really, really, really urge you to read, especially this part, because Tolstoy's insights are so tremendous. And I don't think anybody could really do a good job of summarizing his beliefs, but like I'm doing a very like Spark Notes version of what he's saying and what he's trying to get across. But he continues to be in agony, and for the last 3 days of his life, he's all but screaming, and he sees the toll it's taking on his family. He sees the pain in his family's eyes, and in the end, he comes to this realization that he must accept it. In the end, he comes to this realization that he must not be afraid of death. He must not be afraid of his mortality. He must forgive himself. He must forgive his family. He must forgive the world for exacting this pain on him. And he is able to die with dignity. He's able to die with hope. He's able to die with some sort of realization. And the realization is that when you accept things as they are, then you can deal with things as they are. And there's something very profound in that. I mean, we're 10 minutes into a video. I guess I could begin to explain what that implication is, but I think it's one of those things that you have to find out for yourself, because if I give you the answer, if I tell you what life is about, then you're not going to listen to me. It's something that has to be experienced. And that's the whole point of this story, is that Ivan couldn't understand life until he experienced it. Ivan thought he was doing everything right until he realized he was doing everything wrong. And without this illness, without this debilitating illness that slowly and slowly took away his physical capacity and his capacity to do all the things that he thought were endearing to his life, he would not have realized that these things really weren't what they were cracked up to be. And there's all sorts of really interesting tidbits in this. I found it really interesting that Tolstoy put Ivan Ilyich in one of the most like rigid sort of professions. He was a lawyer, or a prosecutor, which is just a type of lawyer, but basically think that's everything everything in that profession's by the book. Everything in that profession is, you do this, you get this. You're convicted of this, then you get this punishment. And it's sort of that mechanicalness of life. And I think that's very intentional with why he does that. And I think it paints Ivan Ilyich as a very intentional kind of human being. There's no sort of creativity to it. There's no sort of passion to it. It's a mechanical way of living, and I think that's very deliberate. Not to say that every lawyer is that way. If you've met a lot of lawyers, then you'll meet a lot of people that have very interesting sort of characteristics and personalities, because there's a very underlying necessity for charisma in the legal field, especially if you're a defense attorney, especially if you are making deals. There's a necessity to be a very boisterous sort of person and a very lively sort of person, and it does very much benefit you when it comes to dealing with people. But anyway, a really, really good story. I think it's about 60 pages in my version, but it doesn't skip for chapters. It doesn't have an introduction. So, yeah, I thoroughly enjoyed reading this. I'm going to read more of Tolstoy. I need to read War and Peace for sure, and I need to read Anna Karenina. I think that's what it is. Those are really his two major works that I know of. Maybe there's more. I'm assuming there's more, but those are the two that you hear the most, as well as this one. And yeah, it was a nice intro into another author that I definitely feel that I am going to thoroughly enjoy, because just reading this alone, I know I want to hear more of his perspective. I know I want to read more of his perspective. And yeah, with that said, I love you guys so much. Thank you so much. Sorry if I spoiled this story for you, but I don't think I quite did a very good job of getting to the depth of what Tolstoy is explaining, because I don't think you could ever put into a presentation, put into a video exactly the depth and the heart of what Tolstoy is trying to say. So please go read this for yourself. This is one of those works that I think I'm going to come back to time and time again, because it's just that profound. It's just that interesting, and I think it has that much to say. So yeah, love you guys so much. Thank you guys so much. Peace out. I will catch you in the next one.